Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast with Benji Naesen for one of the most important previews we do all year, the World Championships road race, men and women's. The women's will be a separate YouTube video. It's all in one as one podcast. Thanks to our show partner, Lacole, for supporting the pod. We have an exciting announcement for Lacole, which we'll mention a little bit later. But this course in Belgium, it has an interesting parcours, which seems to be a bit of home cooking, which it's an interesting parcours, so it's fine. But for Wout van Aert from Antwerp to Leuven, 268.3 kilometers long. We have two zones, which I'll let Benji go through in more detail in a second. Those zones are, there's a transition from Antwerp over to the first one, which is the local circuit in Leuven. It's pretty flat. We don't expect too much to happen there. Then there's 1.5 laps of a Leuven circuit with short, punchy climbs. Then one lap at what's called a Flandrian circuit with slightly longer climbs. We saw those climbs in Brabantse-Pijl. Back to 4 laps of the local Leuven circuit. Back to the Flandrian circuit, 1 lap, and then back for 2.5 laps of the Leuven circuit. But can you dive down into a bit more detail about these circuits? First of all, the Leuven one, Benji. What sort of climbs are they? What sort of road surface is it? What sort of streets are they?
When it comes to the Leuven one, it is the shorter one of the circuits here. It is a 15.5 roughly kilometer circuit in which you're basically riding through the city of Leuven. There's no intense cobbled climbs in the middle of Leuven in the way that you would expect in a Tour of Flanders, for example. These are basically roads that are relatively steep for 300 to 400 meters. And it starts off at the Keizersberg. After that, we've got the Coulan, we have the Wijnpers, and the Sint Antoniusberg. I think this will be the portion of the parcours that you see a lot of people stand by the side of the road and look at, because it's the middle of Leuven and it's closer to the finish line than going to the Flanders circuit and checking out the climbs there. Nonetheless, this is, in my eyes, a relatively doable section of the course, these circuits, but the problem is not that these climbs individually are great. I think you will agree that this is not like a Tour of Flanders where you've got a Paterberg, an Oude Quaremont, something like that, that opens up the race like that. This is the attrition of all these climbs following each other with these circuits like 4.5 times in a row at some point. That will actually make the race rougher. But I think that this is not the hardest portion of the race. I think that the hardest circuit is the Flandrian circuit. Do you agree on that?
Yeah, definitely. The hardest part of the race is the hardest sort of 3-4 kilometer section is the combination of the Smeesberg and the Moskestraat climbs, 600 meters at 7.2%, and then 600 meters at 7.3% for the latter, with the last 400 meters of the Moskestraat allegedly quite steep at 10%. Whereas, as Benji said, the Leuven circuit is just punctuated by 300 meter, 250 meter, 5 to 6% climbs, some even shorter than that. So, for example, a rider like Mohoric, he needs more than a 300 meter, 6% climb, I think, to be riding away from some of the bigger engines. And it's the Smeesberg or Colbrelli, for example, and Moskestraat combo that they'll really be looking at. The problem for them, Benji, is the last Smeesberg is at 219 Ks done, which is, by my maths, 58 Ks, 60 Ks from the finish. They then got a flat transition back into Leuven for the 2.5 laps to finish. That's a long way for someone like Colbrelli and Mohoric maybe together. What do you see there with solo attacks? Do you see Belgium wanting to use Evenepoel there and happy to go with other riders? Do you think, what I'm trying to ask is, how big a group does there need to be to stay away 50 Ks from the finish?
I think that's a very good question. I think to look at that, we need to look at the entire portion. You said it already. There's so many circuits in a row. We've got initially that 1.5 lap of that Leuven circuit, then the Flandrian circuit for the first time. Again, the 4 laps of the Leuven circuit and that Flandrian circuit, like you mentioned. And like you said, that's still a lot to go to the line. That's Meisberg. But I think that the attrition might not just start off at 60K to go. I think if you look at the parcours, I'm expecting moves already on the first Flandrian circuit. And that's where perhaps we might not even need to look at an Evenepoel yet. But if you look at the Kampenaerts, for example, for Belgium, that seems like a candidate that I'd expect to go on the earlier Flandrian circuit to try and put some pressure on the teams that need to try and chase it down. And that way they could force a team like Italy, for example, who will likely try and, I don't know, I feel like they will not necessarily try and keep it all close together, but
No
they're going
way.
to keep it relatively together towards the end and try and have as many people in the group at the end to bring Colbrelli to the finish line, I would expect. But if Belgium can force people to pace already on the initial circuit, then they're making sure that other countries are definitely using their riders. But Belgium's not the only country here, of course. Are there other countries that you think that might open it up on the initial Flandria circuit?
Well, let's get into the favourites first, because we'll mention, and that will really define how we think the
Yeah.
tactics will play out. But yeah, it does finish with a little like uphill drag into Leuven, and they do that circuit a couple of times more. So only 2,200 meters climbing apparently over the 268 Ks, but a lot of the climbing is like pushed together, and then they have the flat transitions back between the circuits. The favourites by the bookies: Wout van Aert, heavy favourite, $2.85. Second favourite, MVDP at $7.50. I would say if MVDP hadn't cooked his back at the Olympics, he wouldn't be that long, but there's still some question marks despite his Antwerp Port epic win about his physical condition, but he was lining up nonetheless. Alaphilippe, third favourite at 13. Quite surprising to me, frankly. Colbrelli, fourth favourite at 15, then Asgreen at 19, Evenepoel 21, Moritz, who had a very, very good Benelux 21, Magnus Cort 23, which don't see it, Valgren 26, Roglic 26, ahead of Pidcock 29, which is just like, what the fuck are people watching, man? Like, did no one watch Pidcock in the spring? Roglic 26, like, come on, you can't ride on a road, that's less than 4 meters wide. Pogacar at 29s, Pedersen 29, Sagan 34, Trentin 41, Hayter, then Matthews, and Hirschi, Sturven 50s, Honoré 50s, Christoph 67, Seneschal 67, Cosnefroy 67, Caleb Ewan, the quickest man who will line up, is at 81. So, first of all, Benji, Wout van Aert, favourite. It has to be favourite, but is that too short?
I think for a race like this, everything that is around two is too short, because sure, Van Aert is definitely the favorite looking at Tour of Britain, how we beat Alaphilippe, Ethan Hayter, stuff like that. But we got to keep in mind that this is a World Championships. We don't have the rookies at the start line here, and we don't have just a few riders that he needs to focus on. There are many countries with many riders that can definitely outplay Belgium, that will be his competition. And that is where it feels a bit too short for me personally, despite him being the favorite in my eyes as well. I'd indeed look at it at a bit too short, because not only that, not only the fact that he's in the attention as the all-out favorite, just in general, I think that looking at a Van der Poel, like you mentioned, I think that Van der Poel might be, as you mentioned, a bit undervalued or underrated for this race, in the sense that I would expect him to do better, because I think that his preparation obviously wasn't ideal, but based on Antwerp Port Epic and the fact that I would say they have perhaps overplayed his injury a bit towards this moment, it's still possible. Like, we have seen him come back in a very winning way, so it's possible that he's just in decent form and they're slightly using it as a hiding effect. Do you think that's active?
I think so, because if he is really like injured and trying to recover, why is he doing Primus Classic and Gugschapale, a couple of races in the last 3-4 days? He did them back to back on the weekend, some Belgian races, and Antwerp was good. So I think, I don't know, it's always tough to know with Van der Poel, but if he lines up,
And let's
I
be
think.
real, Van Aert gets silver, you know that.
Well, yeah, let's get into it. So there, my initial reactions are: Evenepoel's too long, Court's too short, Pidcock's about right, but Roglic is too short. I really like Evenepoel actually at that price. To be honest, I think if you said, is there more than a 5% chance of Evenepoel winning? I think yes. If you just look at his numbers and the way he's been racing, similar parcours recently, he's just, and the fact that, which we're going to get into now, is Belgium. They got two of the big contenders. It's on home soil. Their team is Lampaard, Kampenaerts, Evenepoel, Van Aert, de Klerk, Sturven, Bernard, Dylan Turns. No Edwin Turns, Benji, no. Who else is missing? I guess Philipsen. What do you think of this team construction as someone who wants a Belgian victory?
How do you know that? Okay, I think if I look at this team, that first of all, Tim de Klerk is an obvious domestique for me in the first place. I think everybody has that feeling when looking at this team. I think Victor Kampenaerts might be a very important factor, looking at how he rode the European Championships, as a rider that can play both a role of trying to open things up and next to that, trying to keep it closed if necessary when it comes to a closer part towards the end of the race. Then we've got Dylan Turns and Dylan Turns and Benoit would be the two riders that I've got the feeling that would be more leaning towards the later sections, to like the second Flandrian circuit, to play a role in that. But on the other hand, I somehow feel like these two are elements in the team that will likely just fold into a domestique role at a certain point. I just don't know where, because if you look at the Flandrian circuit, yeah, you can say, oh, they're going to be pacing for Van Aert, but pacing for Van Aert seems a bit of an odd thing. It seems like trying to get into moves, trying to set things up in those Flandrian circuits is something that I do expect more than someone just simply pacing, because I don't think the Flandrian circuit exactly looks like a place you can pace throughout, and I think they want to make sure that Colbrelli's in a bit of trouble, even though that's going to be a really tough challenge.
Why would they care about Colbrelli? Why would you care about Colbrelli? He's not even fast.
Well, I do care about Colbrelli because he's been winning a lot lately, and
not in sprints.
Well, what's going to happen if we come to the last 5K and Wout van Aert gets a puncture and Evenepoel has to sprint against Colbrelli
again? If he gets a puncture, then you can't control that. Then you change your tyre manufacturer. But I think, when is Ewan getting dropped, Benji? Or are we going to see Poggio Ewan?
Are we going to see Poggio Ewan? That's a difficult one to guess, because we didn't expect it at the Poggio either. But I think that he's getting dropped on the second Flandrian circuit. Or do you expect it sooner or later?
So. I think if Belgium if the teams don't pace enough to drop Ewan on the Smeesberg Moskestraat, then they deserve to lose to him, frankly. You have to pace there if he's still in the group there, coming back from his collarbone. So they have to pace. I think, looking though, Pedersen's form has been very, very bad. He was on the provisional start list for Eschborn Frankfurt. I'm just looking, and he's lined out here for Denmark. Who here wants a 25-man sprint, Benji? A 20-man sprint, apart from Belgium with Van Aert? I'm looking Denmark with Asgreen, no. Australia with Matthews, not sure about that. Pidcock in a 25-man, I don't think they'd be too happy with that. Slovenia with Moric, nope. Italy with Colbrelli, nope. MVDP, probably not either. He would like to attack. Kosnefra and Alaphilippe, doubt it. Degenkolb would, if he could make it. Degenkolb would with Wout van Aert, but
Colombia with Hodge.
Oh, true.
Could he get over those hills? I think it's going to be.
He's in better form, but I doubt it.
Yeah, true.
I doubt it. But I'm just saying, there's not a lot of teams that want to sprint, whereas there's a lot of teams like Denmark who I see set up to attack, and Britain as well. You look at how Pidcock rode Brabantspel and Amstel. He's got here Rowe, Fred Wright, Ben Swift, Ethan Hayter, who want to attack as well. I think it's going to be difficult for Belgium to control these things, Benji, and that's why I think Evenepoel is going to get a free license to go up the road. Now, do you think he's going to attack Benji on one of these climbs, or do you think he's solely going to be used to go with an Asgreen if he attacks and then sit on him?
I think depending on the situation, he will choose to do either of them. If, for example, an Asgreen goes, then I would be not surprised that he follows that. But if nobody ends up going on a climb where it would really fit, I wouldn't be surprised that Remco would go for a move himself. So I think he's going to try and get into a situation that is ahead of the peloton, and in that way put Van Aert in a sofa while having his own chances if that break ends up making it. And whether that's following somebody or just attacking himself, that will influence the fact on whether he continues that action. Because let's say he makes that move and you see that, I don't know, what if Mohoric follows? Would you continue riding if you're Evenepoel? Because you're losing the sprint against Mohoric, so you need to drop him before the finish line. And dropping Mohoric before the finish line is unlikely.
It's tough. It depends who's forced to chase behind. If you are keeping the gap at a nice tight 25, 35 seconds and it's forcing Italy to burn everybody and Britain to burn everybody and Denmark as well, then maybe you relay a little bit. The thing is with Evenepoel, I mean, you can go and look in his data when he's pulling, like and then you see it on the road as well. He's putting other guys under pressure even when he's taking a turn because his CDA is so low in the road position. You also looked, I went back and looked at the European Championships when he was, we're like, get off the front with Colbrelli. He only did like 200 watts for that finish from the climb. He was basically at recovery as well. I think Evenepoel is the key to Belgium winning because, as Benji said, you put Evenepoel up the road, all the other teams are on the defence then, and he's been incredibly strong in Belgian Classics and then at the World Championships. He did, I think, 6 to 6.1 watts per kilo for 48 minutes in TT position. It's incredible form and condition, and I think, the problem is Benji, not Mohoric. I think it's if he goes with a group with Asgren and Pidcock and maybe like Quinn Simmons, then you're fucked. Or MVDP.
I think so as well. Although with Quinn Simmons, I would dare to still make the guess that he might drop him throughout the parkour, depending on which Quinn Simmons we get, because we've seen a few other, as well already. We've had a great one at Strade, and then at the Vuelta it was a bit less, to be honest. But looking at Belgium in total and that Evenepoel key, the ideal situation I see for Belgium is that indeed Van Aert is very close towards the front of the race in the last portion of the race, and the group is not that large. And ideally, if Evenepoel is in that group, then the question rises, what do? Do you attack with Evenepoel once again when we have a 10-man group, or do you have him base at the front to keep it together? And that will depend on who is in the group with Van Aert, for example. And I would dare to say if there's no one in there with a sprint that Remco will just straight up head to the front of the group, start racing, Van Aert in second wheel, and good luck to anybody else who will try and attack from that point onwards, because the man can drive, we know that. And I'm curious, going into another rider in that team, what Stuyven's role will be. I think Stuyven's home region is Leuven, so that's going to be a pretty cool day for that guy. But here, knowing that he said multiple times that Van Aert is the all-out leader here, but Remco also has a freer role in working for Van Aert. He's not going to be locked up, apparently, according to the coach. When it comes to Stuyven, I question what his role will be. Sure, he'll likely be up there for a while and could play an essential role as well in keeping it together or going into moves, because while Evenepoel is the guy you can put in an attack and not really have a sprint, Stuyven is the guy you can put in an attack and actually have a sprint to try and finish it off,
I think Stuyven surely will be more defensive or leading out Van Aert. And I think back to the template for Jumbo-Visma and Van Aert is Gent Wevelgem this year, when he got into a group where he was the quickest, I guess, against Danny Van Poppel's been looking better, had Nathan Van Hooydonk to close things down and then led him out for the sprint, and he beat everybody, including Nizzolo, pretty handily. So that's the template. My question is, Van Aert at the end of 268 Ks with some climbing. We've seen his sprint not be that good this year either, Benji, including on or not up to expectations. He got beaten at Brabantse Pijl on an uphill rise by Pidcock by, bike lengths and bike lengths. And 3 days later at Amstel, yes, obviously a hard race, but not beaten, but the sprint was very, very close. And
it depends on who.
Yeah, it depends who you ask. I think, Van Aert is not 100% locked to win a reduced bunch sprint against riders like Degenkolb if he makes it, even Kosnefra. He will, most likely, but it's not a lock either, or Asgren. But Before we get to France, who I want to talk about actually, Benji, I mentioned the news I teased about Lecole. Lecole have announced they've entered into a 3-year kit partnership with Bora Hansgrohe starting in 2022. Big news for Lecole. They're back in the World Tour. Sam Bennett's obviously going over to Bora Hansgrohe next year. I'll be keen to see the aero clothing they line up for Bennett next year. Obviously, Lecole have been a show partner of the show since its inception. So it's pretty cool for us to see them now going back into a world tour as well. And there might be some Lecole, like with when they supplied kit to Bahrain, they helped organise interviews with some of their riders then. It'll be cool to see if we can sort something like that out to get some of the Bora riders on the podcast next year as well. So I wanted to give a big congrats to Lecole and let everyone know that news as well. They produce performance cycling apparel, and you can check more out at the link below at lecole.cc. But the French team, Benji, Alaphilippe third favourite, 13s. Cosnefroy at 67. Cosnefroy, I think, he's fucking on. European champs, he was really, really good.
Yeah.
And then Britannia Classic, he absolutely cooked Alaphilippe. Am I missing something? Why is Alaphilippe better on this course than Benoit?
I don't think he necessarily needs to be seen as better than Benoit Cosnefroy, and I think perhaps that's a valid point for France, that they have Alaphilippe, but nobody's really looking at Cosnefroy, who's sitting in the shadows and might be the person that they send forward on a Flandrian circuit. Because we were talking about Belgium a lot, about opening the reins as Belgium, but Belgium might be the country that is one of the ones that might not need to open it up compared to the likes of a France, who will likely, well, want to try and open it up earlier, because sure, Cosnefroy is the perfect attacker for that. The one issue with Cosnefroy is that at the EC, after a race that is significantly shorter than this one, he was cooked on the last spot. And the question then is, was that because of the consecutive large hills, or was that because of the intensity of the race? Because I don't think this race is going to be less intense than the EC circuit we had as well. So that is a potential thing that they could look at and see, okay, perhaps that's why Alaphilippe is our main guy, because we are not sure that Cosnefroy is going to keep up for 200 plus kilometers and be able to still finish it off if he is in a group. What do you think about that aspect?
I think EC didn't suit him as much. I just think he's much better on the shorter climbs. Like I remember Brabants, he was spicing things up. I really, really like Cosnefroy for this course. And I think Alaphilippe's sprint, I just think he's not been as good this year, frankly, Alaphilippe. And yes, he was okay at Tour of Britain, but got consistently he was handed to him by Wout van Aert on some of these harder finishes. But the French team as a whole is very strong. Turgis, Alaphilippe, Laporte, Cavagnard, Cosnefroy, Sénéchal, Madouin, Damas on the PCS list, Clement Rousseau. I mean, they've got a lot of options here. Laporte's quite fast. He's a pretty good classics rider. Turgis, obviously, very, very strong. I just don't know how they're going to use all those pieces. And I think them riding 100% for Alaphilippe doesn't really make sense to me, to be honest. They got strength in numbers. And they're one of those teams that I think are going to be putting pressure on Belgium to spice things up, because they don't want to go to a 30-man group finish.
Yeah. And when we look at, for example, a Sénéchal, who might be also an underdog in this team, he recently won that Primus Classic, I think, was it last week? And that included a significant portion of the parkour that we have here. That included the likes of a Moskestraat. And to be fairly honest, that was a race of 200 kilometers and had less hills in general. And the last hill was roughly, I think, 40 kilometers from the line. So looking at that and how it was able to force a 6-man group to end up winning that race, that surely means that we are not looking at a sprint, because there were a few people that I think were hinting at a potential sprint at the end of this course, and I just don't see it happening at all.
Yeah, and also you go back to Gent-Wevelgem 2020 when NVDP and Wout van Aert looked at each other, also there with a flat earth section after the final climb. Sénéchal came second there to Pedersen. So yeah, he's a good one for this course. Other teams with strong riders, I guess Germany, Schachmann, Arndt, Jonas Koch, Georg Zimmermann, who's actually been quite good this year, the Intermarché one, Degenkolb, Ackermann, Niels Pollitt. I know. I see all those guys as just second tier guys. I think maybe Pollitt will be someone trying to get into moves as well. He was good at the tour, so another one to add into the making life hard for Belgium category. Norway can't ever ignore Alexander Kristoff, especially, I don't know, it's probably not going to rain, but they've got Hulgaard, who's good,
Yeah,
Vergaard, Steker, Langen, Kristoff, Bistrom, Eiching, and Tiller. It's a pretty strong team, Benji.
I think so as well. I'm looking forward to see what Tiller and Holgard do, the UNOX boys. And to be honest, when you look at what Tiller has been doing all year, he's been very close on a lot of races. I think he won Dwarswoord Kageland or something and got very close in one of the smaller races at the start of the season as well. Most recently was also fifth in that race that Van Dippel won the Antwerp Port Epic. So he certainly has form. And if I recall correctly, he was fifth in that race while having 3 punctures in a row. So that was an experience to behold on like just after each other, which is mad stuff. Hopefully he doesn't have that on this parkour, but I hope that him and Marcus Hulgaard are able to perform really well as well, because Hulgaard was also was that European Championships where he was also riding very well, and in the last group with
Yeah.
Evenepoel and so forth. Yeah, and the parkour there was perhaps less suitable than this one, to be honest. While Hulgaard can climb, he's not the best
No,
climber in the world, and the acceleration is missing to follow attacks on those climbs. While on the shorter climbs, he might have enough to follow such attacks and be of worth today. This weekend, because he was also decent at Norway, right? Was it that race?
I think so. I can't remember. I always get him and Tiller mixed up. You know who for world champs you always have to throw out some riders that can win, because world champs you get weird results sometimes. And Mike Turnison at 200 to 1 I like it a lot, because he's won he won yellow in such a weird way. He is fast. He's at Benelux. I thought he was pretty solid. Eschborn, Frankfurt. I mean, Norway was all right as well. He's just been there or thereabouts. He's obviously on lead-out duties at to the Tour de France. He's just, if there was a rider to randomly pop up, and maybe Plugger for Jumbo Visma would put the call in, Mike, you're not sprinting as well for in a reduced bunch. But yeah, he's someone as well as Van Baal. I think it's weird. Like Netherlands have got Van Poppel, Ankhorn, Riesebeck, Langeveld, Turnison, Mollema, Van Baal, NVDP. Who do they go for in a final sprint?
Why is Van der Horn not there, mate? Taco.
That can't be right. Is he not in there? How's he not there?
It's illegal.
No, there's no. I'm going off PCS. There's no shot Oscar Riesebeck is in there instead of Taco van der Horn.
It's a confirmed start list, I'm afraid.
No way.
You can't believe it.
That's fucked. They're not watching Antwerp Port Epic. Anyway, Danny Van Poppel's actually been in. I think he could probably top. I think he could top 5 actually. World's Benji. Gugshapale was second. The race you mentioned for Seneschal, I think he could top 5 here as well. But let's get on to another big favourite team, Great Britain, and see what Benji thinks about how they're going to race. Rowe Swift, Connor Swift, that is. Hayter, Pidcock, Jake Stewart, Mark Cavendish, Fred Wright, and the other Swift, actually, Ben Swift. They were at GP Denain with a lot of these riders the other day. Rowe looked in good condition. Pidcock's probably their leader, Benji, but who does Hayter, is he able to make it to this finish?
Yeah, I think yes.
I think he can as well.
When we look at Tour of Britain, he was only beaten by a long shot on the hill that was significantly looking like a Mur de Huy style climb in Great Britain, and you don't have that on this parkour. So we don't need to worry about that aspect. And in all honesty, when we look at the team of Great Britain, like you mentioned, it's a very strong team and perhaps underrated in that aspect, because the initial rider you look at is obviously Tom Pidcock. When you watch Tour of Britain, you look at Ethan Hayter, but Fred Wright rode a glorious Bing Bang Tour.
Yeah.
And he's going to likely be there in the last 50K, I would expect. So he could play a role as well for Pidcock and for Hayter, or for himself, worst case scenario, because I would expect the other two to be faster personally. Or do you think that Wright could put in a sprint that could surprise everybody here?
No, I think Wright's the leader, man. He's not that fast in terms of like 10-second and acceleration. I think he's a great leader. Connor Swift as well, if you remember. What was that race he did? Britannia Classic. He was very strong, 25-year-old on RKS Samsic, as well as he's there next year. Won Trobro Lyon this year. I think they've got a very, very strong team
Yeah.
all around, well-balanced team, Britain. I don't expect Cavendish to make it, but in terms of I expect Pidcock to go on the Moskestraat.
Yeah.
Remember, Brabantse Pijl, he attacked. He put Trentin and Van Aert under a lot of pressure there, bridged across not solo, but he was good on the Moskestraat in Brabantse Pijl. I expect him to go early, put pressure on, and then they have Hayter behind, and Swift can also 1-2. If they get a group with Connor Swift, Luke Rowe, Pidcock, Fred Wright in a group of 12, that is very, very dangerous. So they have a very strong team. Any other thoughts on them, Benji? What about Kwiatkowski? Okay, GP Dinan. Do you expect anything from him? Pete Kwiatkowski would have been great for this race.
Yeah, and he was actually not riding that badly at the other race this week, GP Dinan, where Ineos opened up the race very early in a BTEC Roubaix circuit, basically, because it had Roubaix cobbles outside of Paris-Roubaix, which does not happen often. But he was very decent at the start there. He actually ended up outside of the top 30, so perhaps in the end, not that amazing, but I think it was because it ended up in a bit of a bunch sprint with Philipsen, so you can't look at that position really. But I think that Kwiatkowski has, in my eyes, lost the X factor to win races, if that makes any sense. Like, he's good all round, but he's always missing something to win the race. He's not a good enough climber to win the mountain stages. He's not a good enough cobbler to win the cobble races. He's not fast enough as a puncher anymore to beat the punchers that we have currently in the peloton. And that's a problem when you come up against the people that are great at punching, great at sprinting. And that's why he's one of the better domestiques in the world, because he is not the best, but he can help out to get another best rider to achieve a victory over the others. And that's why I personally don't see it for Kwiatkowski on this terrain. But I think we're looking past a country that is very, very strong. And we mentioned him quite a few times already, and his teammates as well. And we're looking at Italy in that aspect. Colbrelli, Trentin, and Ballerini's here as well, I think. Moscon.
Yes.
What do you think is their play style in this
Destroy
race?
the race. It has to be. Colbrelli's not fast. None of these guys are fast, except Ballerini, but he might not make it. Nizzolo as well might not. Nizzolo, tough for him on this course. But
to be clear, when we're talking about fasts, who do you think that Colbrelli can beat in a sprint, and who do you think he cannot beat in a sprint?
I think he's really not fast. Like,
he beat Remco.
He beat Remco. I think he is honestly, and he's leaning into this now, and that's why I think in part he's had a lot more success this year. He is better at a 7-minute effort than his unique ability is to repeat 5 to 7 minute efforts, and at his weight, and then have a bit of punch at the end. And uphill, he's quite good as well, like at Dauphiné, where he won that sprint against Aramburu, unfortunately for you, Benji. I think if he goes to the line with someone like Christoph or Degenkolb, even Kosnefra, I think Pidcock Pidcock would hate to destroy Colbrelli in a sprint. And even Rob Stannard might, like, they're the same speed to me. So that's why I think they have to have an open race, and they've got Trent in there as well to do that sort of thing. Moscon as well gets an insane buff at World Championships. He's going to attack from far as well. So, but is he fourth favourite good, Benji, Colbrelli?
I think that the Colbrelli that we've looked at for the latter portion of the year here is definitely one of the top 7, top 6 favorites here. And the only reason that I don't see him in like heavy favorite position, as in the all-out favorite for this race, is because I might dare to say that the parkour might not be hard enough to have Colbrelli at a very solid, heavy favorite position, which does not mean he can't win the race, but it has to be a more specific way of winning it. When we arrive at a sprint between Colbrelli and Van Aert, my personal guess is that Van Aert will win. But then again, I don't know. Van Aert, like you said earlier, has had some sprints after heavy races where his sprint was not that fierce anymore. And that's where somebody else who has a bit more got to get through the rougher races might be able to outplay him. And that's then a question like where we talk about Christoph being a rider that in these harder races has more chance towards the end of a harder race. Is Colbrelli someone like that? If it rains, for example, is he better? If it's a harder race, is he better in the final sprint against people as well? Or do you think that it's just average?
I think he gets a big buff with the rain, but no, I'm not sure a 260k race is something that otherwise we would have seen him doing better at Amstel and races like that in the past, although he's always been fairly good at Brabantse Pijl. Otherwise, Switzerland, they have Bissegger, Hirschi, Kung, Leonard, and Scher. I think too hard for Bissegger, too long, and Hirschi's not been as good, and it's not hard
He's
enough
coming
for him.
back.
It's not
I
hard
feel
enough
like
for him.
he's been doing decent in through the Luxembourg, even though like the competition there was decent, but it's not going to be like in Almeida, for example. Yeah, the time trial was what won in that race, but I wouldn't say that Hirschi was that bad at through the Luxembourg. But I would dare to
Yeah.
say he will compete in the latter portions of this race. I think that he definitely will survive until then
He'll
for
probably be in a group.
Switzerland. Yeah,
What
certainly.
What about Kung?
Are the hills too hard for him? I don't
No,
know,
I don't
actually.
know. No, they're not. They're not too.
Early move,
The
though.
problem for Kung is he can't sprint.
Yeah,
So
he has to go with an early move, like in, what was the year again? 2019 that Pedersen won the World Championships. He was also in that final move together with Trentin, who we didn't speak about at all, despite talking about the Italian team, and probably is going to play a key role.
No, but he'll ride for Colbrelli.
Yeah, I think so as well. But then again, he could also end up sprinting for it if it ends up in a smaller group. But we were talking about Kung, and I don't think the parkour is too hard for Kung necessarily. But he's got the problem that he always has. Same that he has in Gent-Wevelgem this year.
Yep.
The fact that he can't really get away from people because usually they still have the energy to follow him. And therefore he needs to go really early and usually has somebody with him that is just plainly better in sprints.
All right, one of the last big teams we'll mention, apart from obviously Australia, who will probably be riding for Matthews, although I'd like to see Harry Sweeney in a free role because I'm assuming, I mean, Caleb Ewan win, I'd love to see it, but the other teams would have to stuff up their race pacing so much for Ewan to make this, I think. I don't know, Ewan, don't be surprised if he's there with 30 k's to go, but then there'll be raining attacks. But then there's also Matthews and Stannard with Durbridge. Anyway, the fact that Heinrich Hausler, I'm now dwelling on it, the fact that Heinrich Hausler is not in this team and Nathan Haas is in this team is like literally mind-boggling.
Like, does it have anything to do with his double nationality or something? Or
he's got an Australian race license, I'm pretty sure. Hausler, he rides under Australia. I mean, he came fourth at Omloop. And then was 20th and 18th in Ronde and Dwars of Vlaanderen, and he's been doing good lead-outs all year. I don't know, maybe he just didn't want to race it. But the last big team, Slovenia, Roglic, Novak, Moric, Polance, Pogačar, Tratnik, Mezgec. Who's the leader, Benji?
I think that
Moho.
I think as well Mohoric is going to be the leader on this one. But then again, I feel like Pogačar could definitely play a role in this race as well as a key figure to lighten it up and go early on those Flandrian circuits and be in groups in the same way that he was at European Championships, also early on in the group.
At Imola as well. He sacrificed himself for Rogla.
Yeah, indeed. I don't think it will be for Rogla this time around, though, and I'm curious what Rogla is going to offer for this team, because I would not say he's terrible at it, but I also don't see it really as like the rider that will all out bring it here for Slovenia on this particular parkour, and I think he's mainly here for his I don't know, for his presence. Is that a thing?
I don't really know why, to be honest, but because he's a good rider and he's Slovenian, I think. Otherwise, Goggle top 10 would be pretty funny, and I wouldn't be surprised by it either.
Are we just skipping the GOAT, or what are we doing here, man? Come on.
Who's the GOAT? Oh,
Alex fucking Aramburu.
Is he riding this?
Of course, he's the leader of Spain. Come on, man.
Garcia Cortina's the leader.
No, he's not. Garcia Cortina hasn't seen form since the medieval ages.
Garcia Cortina's the leader.
Nah.
Sixth at Eschborn Frankfurt in a group with guys that weren't very fast. That is a great form.
Aramburu was out sprinted by Colbrelli last week in the Memorial Pontani. Okay, looking at the team that Shut up.
Trenton still lost though.
We do have that one guy, Soto, that we kept talking about for the top tens in Vuelta. That is also here.
Yeah. I mean, Spain, this Spanish riders, I mean, they've been terrible this year. They didn't win a Grand Tour stage. And I think, yeah, Garcia Cortina is theoretically supposed to be the guy for this course, but we've already spent too much time on them. Colombia have got Hodge. Ecuador, I'm not sure who their leader is. There's obviously Sagan on Slovakia, Benji.
Probably should mention him, just in case.
He gets a world champs buff, but he's got the problem that he's not as fast anymore either. Like he's lost a lot, I think, in his sprint. What sort of situation does he need to win? Because he was good at Benelux too.
I think that he might be the kind of rider that people just are overlooking simply at the moment because he's been away from the top game for a bit. And sure, he's been riding Tour of Slovakia, but I don't think Wout van Aert has been watching the Tour of Slovakia every single night in his bed. So that might be the rider that, like in Richmond, is just hidden behind people, and suddenly in the last 20K, Sagan is still there. And while we would say, he's not that fast, he always strikes fear in the hearts of the people that are still there in the last 20 kilometers, and he will certainly play a role in how the sprint is prepped or how that group is making moves, because they will be looking at him despite him perhaps not being the sprinter he was anymore, So, you think that's
I don't know. I think people will respect Sagan. But I think he'll get into moves. A top 5 wouldn't surprise me. The problem is his finish. He's just not as fast anymore. And then is he good enough to go solo like Gilbert style at Tour of Flanders? I don't really see that either. The team we haven't spoken about enough, I think, is Denmark's tactics. Honoré's in very good form. They've got Valgren, who just won. Krohn, Kortbjerg, Pedersen, Asgren, Bertschmidt. I think they should be all in on an open race, Benji, for the likes of Valgren, Honoré, and Asgren. Pedersen's form has looked terrible.
I think it all depends on whether it rains or not. Because Pedersen gets that 100,000 watt buff if it starts raining on the course. And I think we're talking about Pedersen as if he hasn't had form all year, but actually in Denmark, for example, he was one of the riders that was being in the moves with Evenepoel and so forth on the pretty tougher circuit. So I think this parkour might just be in his reach. And I think if you're looking at a rider that is in the last 20 kilometers in a group with Van Aert, and there's multiple Danish people still there, and they've got Pedersen, that is the one team that I would dare to say Pedersen could take on Van Aert after a hard race like this and end up winning that sprint.
For sure.
And like 2 years ago, when Mads Pedersen won his world championships, I think a lot of people were like, how did this happen? Like, how is this guy world champion? Sure, he was very talented. The majority of people that followed cycling outside of like the Tour de France knew that. But they weren't really expecting Mads Pedersen to win the World Championships. And now he feels like a candidate for this one for me. And I've been looking at him all year, whether his form was getting better or worse throughout the parcours he was riding. And I feel like it's gotten better to the point where I do see him as an actual candidate here to play a role in potentially being a surprise winner at the end of the parkour. But like you said, they've got so many candidates, and I think Asgren's the kind of rider that you can't keep waiting until the last push. You need to make moves with him. You need to be in moves with him, and perhaps even launch moves with him. But how heavy do you weigh the sprint that he had against Van der Poel at Tour of Flanders? Do you think that's viable again if he's in a group with a rider like Van der Poel or a Colbrelli, for example, stuff like that?
Yeah, Colbrelli for sure. Colbrelli, Mulrich, Pidcock. I think Asgren has to just take his chances in the sprint, unless he has a read on being able to attack them or he doesn't trust the sprint. I think you have to trust it, except against the very top guys with the lead out. If it's a 5-man group from slow speed, I like his sprint, just like in Tour of Flanders. But yeah, that's our assessment of the start list, the tactics. I think it will be incumbent upon Belgium to control things. When you have the 5-star favourite in Wout van Aert, that means other teams will look at you to close down dangerous moves. Whether Belgium then flip the script and put their riders in those moves, and then what happens then, it will be something very, very interesting to watch, because there could be a situation where they get a rider, like VC or turns or whatever in a move, And then that move is one that they're like, oh no, this is actually not a good situation for us. So I'm expecting a lot of attacks and an exciting race for sure. What's your podium, Benji?
I'm going to go for a podium, and then I'll actually first do an outsider pick. One that
Okay.
I feel like
Yeah.
is a rider that might be overlooked by many, but could end up in a role that might have him winning the race. It's not an Amburu this time around, despite me seeing him as the obvious winner for this race. Let's be real. Let's honestly be real. I'm going to go with Ethan Hayter based on what I've seen all year.
Yep.
And that is the fact that every bloody race that he starts, he usually plays a significant role. He was on his way to win Algarve at the start of the season until he fell in the time trial. And then the next day wasn't as strong, meaning a W52 rider ended up winning that race. We saw him at Dwarsdorp Vlaanderen, I think, very close to the front of the race. I can't remember which position, really. I think top 15 somewhere. So that's a proof that he can also do it on the cobble hills. Although that race wasn't the most extreme, I think it was the one that Van Baarle ended up winning. And then we looked at the likes of Andalusia. He was also very strong there, ended up taking 2 stages in sprints on hills or false flat up hills in a similar way that this race could end up finishing if that happens. And then he grew up a bit towards Bretagne Classic, where he ended up 4th in that race. And that's really a decent result, I would dare to say, because I think that, like we mentioned on the review of that, the team probably could have gotten him closer to the grid that was ahead. And if they were, then he might have been closer to potentially winning that race, because he ended on like 13 seconds.
And he won the group
And
sprint.
yeah, exactly. Then Tour of Britain, he was one of the better riders on that race. And he, if it wasn't for Wout van Aert, would have won that race quite easily, I would dare to say. So
Yep.
he's the rider that I'm looking at Great Britain, who will likely stand in the shadows of Tom Pidcock, but
And 8th
might
in
be
the
the rider
TT,
that,
Benji.
yeah, but do you think
That's a good
that a
result.
solo Ethan Hayter will end up here?
I
Or
don't. No, I don't think so. It's an indication of his long
yeah,
endurance, of
true.
his aerobic form at the moment. 8th in a 48-minute TT is nice in Belgium. In the last week, I think that's just a good indication.
Yeah, I think so as well. Do you have an outsider while I think about my
Yes,
potential top
I have
3,
a
because I
few.
did not do this at all?
Caleb Ewan, have to, required by law. Obviously, if it's a slow race and if he surprises, his class rider, of course.
Jesus Christ.
I'd like Caleb Ewan. Don't sleep on him. Quinn Simmons, of course. I liked him in that break at the tail end of the Vuelta, where he came into some better shape. He was not good in the first 2 weeks of the Vuelta, or I can't remember when that break was. But a good sprint against Cort, just terrible tactics. But he is strong, and I'd like to see him on this course as well. He's obviously a huge outsider. Cosnefroy is my real outsider. He's like 70s plus. Cosnefroy, I really like him for this course, and he's fast. People underrate his speed as well in a sprint. If he races smart, which is a big if, I do like it. But my podium is Remco Evenepoel, Wout van Aert, and Benoit Cosnefroy. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, my podium will be why go for a boring podium when you can do something bloody crazy and put your outsider as winner? Ethan Hayter is going to be world champion on Sunday, and he's going to be doing so ahead of uh, I am going to say Asgren, and in the 3rd position I'm going to be putting Valgren.
Valgren, yeah, he gets a world champs buff as well, doesn't he? Isn't he good in world champs
Yeah,
races?
he's pretty damn great in world champs race. I think that's the reason I had him as a decent rider at the Olympics, but that made no sense in hindsight.
So I'm expecting big things from Evenepoel because he's
I'm expecting more from Belgium than I've put in my top 3, but I want to be a guy that's trolling a bit when it comes to podium and accidentally gets Ethan Hayter right and can brag about it all year.
I just think there's more chance of getting Evenepoel solo late than relying solely on a Wout van Aert reduced bunch sprint against 12 guys. A lot of things, even if he is the heavy favourite for that sprint, a lot of things can happen there. So I think you have to play the Evenepoel card given his form. But that's our long preview of the Men's World Championships road race. We went into a lot of detail there. If you did enjoy it, you can like the video down below. Make sure you roast us on Twitter with your picks. We'll put up a tweet with our picks because I always forget mine and then claim I picked the winner. So Benji now wants it on the record what I've actually said for the podium, and we'll see you with the recap of the women's road race on Saturday if nothing comes up otherwise before then. Thanks for supporting the podcast. Ciao.